you know, it's okay if I just like get up and walk around the block. Not because I need to walk around the block because it's healthy for me and, all of those
Mm-hmm.
things. But yeah, I'm just going to go outside and spend a little time outside and sit in my garden for no reason.
Are you feeling overwhelmed, stuck, or uncertain about how to grow your business without sacrificing what really matters most? Welcome to The Business You Really Want, the show for women ready to build a sustainable, fully aligned business. Aligned with what, you ask? You, your values, your life. Seriously, it is possible. I'm Tonya Kubo, and along with business advisor extraordinaire Gwen Bortner, we're here to show you how. Today, we are doing something really special. I'm so excited, Gwen. I don't know if you've been counting, but we are at episode 12. And we're actually at the part of our podcasting journey, you and me, that we have, we can actually have a breadth, a library of resources to point people to. And we have feedback because we have listeners now. And guess what? It's not just our husbands. It's not. And the reason I know it's not just our husbands is because we have reviews and our husbands' names are not attached to the reviews. And I know it's not my husband because, well, my husband doesn't use Apple. So definitely no, it's not him. So what I wanted to do today, Gwen, is I want to dive into the reviews that our amazing listeners have left for us, because it's such a great snapshot, I think, into what the current, right now we're recording 2024, what the current female entrepreneur, small business owner, whatever label you like to use, it's such a great snapshot into what they're facing and what they're looking for. When I read through the reviews, and I don't think you read them as closely as I do, because I don't think anybody reads reviews as closely
I am sure that is
as
the case.
I don't think anybody reads them as closely as I do. But it's like there's these themes. Like one big theme that I'm seeing is limited time and how you manage that. Like what defines success. And so what I want to do is, first of all, I want to read some of the reviews because I think if you're going to take the time to leave a review on Apple, which by the way, I tried to do on a different show and it's not easy. So right now, if you have left us an Apple review, thank you. Thank you for overcoming the frustration that might have entailed for you. It was frustrating for me. And thank you for the words that you used. So we all have a lot of reviews and I won't read all of them. But so we've got one here that says that, this is from a person, and actually, sorry, Apple is not telling me who you are right now, but that's okay, is when I heard about the podcast, I couldn't wait to listen. And then it says, I have burnt my business to the ground a few times, and I found the first episode so refreshing. So Gwen, if you'll remember, that is the episode where we kind of talked about why we're here.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Right. And so this reviewer says, thanks to Gwen. So that's you, Gwen. You should read these. They say a lot of nice things about you. Thanks to Gwen for being brave enough to speak the truth and give helpful action steps. So that's review one. And I'm sure there is a much more efficient way to go through these. Forgive me. If you are on YouTube, just forgive me for the eye contact. All right. So then we had another reviewer, and this one I can actually see their name. This is from Alicia. And Alicia's a brand new business owner. And what she said is she feels like Tonya and Gwen are teaching her things before she has the chance to make mistakes. And what excites her is the ability to implement what she learns so that she can start her business off right from the get-go.
And I know that makes me so happy.
I was going to say, I knew that would be your favorite review, Gwen. Mm-hmm. Because why don't you share a little bit about why that might be your favorite review?
Well, because we get so caught up in what, quote unquote, everybody is saying, or best practices, or any of those things that aren't necessarily true. Mm-hmm. We end up going down a path that may or may not actually make really good sense for us. And if it does, fab. But a lot of times there's some aspect that it doesn't. And what I'm really hoping that we're communicating to everybody is question everything. which, I can't remember when it was, but there was a post or something that we did where it said, even us, don't don't take us,
Right.
question us too. Because although I like to be right and I try to be right as much as possible, and I also try to be as open to all of the variance as possible, I'm not always right. And if nothing, what I heard her say, it's not what she said, but what I heard her say was, you're making me be aware that I should question everything, and that I don't have to do it the way everyone quote unquote has said I have to do it. And I think the more of us that start down that path, the more the quicker success is going to come for us, the more satisfied we will be with the success we achieve. And, ultimately that is always my goal.
Yes. And I think that, I know for me, gosh, if I could go back in time and avoid like some big mistakes, like there's not much I wouldn't give in order to have that opportunity. And so the idea that this show can help other people do that is like huge, absolutely huge. All right, so now we're going to read Julia's review. Julia's is one of my favorites too, because what she pointed out, and I promise, Gwen, I'm not going to say everyone's my favorite, okay? but a lot of them are my favorite. But she talked about how what she appreciated was that helping people focus success based on what you want versus what it should look like. And for Julia, this has motivated her to do some work inside herself to really think about what her definition of success is. And then, of course, another favorite is just somebody, anytime you leave a review that says, I don't listen to podcasts, but I listen to this one, you immediately become the podcaster's favorite person. I'm just going to tell you that. You're the A++ listener. But this is from a solopreneur who, is feeling that crunch of having to do, feeling like they have to do all the things, right? Because they're a solopreneur, and then feeling like they're not making any headway because they have to do all the things. And I will just read one more so then we can get into the fun stuff, is just from Kathy, who's actually been in business on her own for 10 years and is excited about learning new stuff, excited about learning from the show. And I love that. And so here's what I pulled out. So Gwen, I want you to share sort of like what you heard in what I said. But what I have pulled out is that there is pressure that female entrepreneurs experience, or at least feel, when it comes to traditional success measures or traditional success metrics. When I look at the reviews, I see a lot about time, feeling crunched for time, not enough hours in the day, that kind of stuff. And also this desire to learn what to look out for before you're actually there. What are your thoughts?
So I heard lots of the same things. I think I'll say one of the most critical things that we talk about, but is also the least often said, is success is not a simple definition. Mm-hmm. And I think so often we are taught to believe that it is a simple definition, it's this formula, this plus this plus this equals this, and that's what that's what success formula looks like. And it's like, no, it's way more complex than that. And I appreciate the reviewer who said is doing a lot of internal work, because it's easy to say and it sounds simple, but it's actually really hard work to figure out that piece. And I think the time element is just an ongoing thing. And I'm old, and so from an old perspective, it's like, and it just keeps getting worse because we get more and more conditioned for things to be so fast.
Right.
And I was at an event this last weekend and was talking with someone, and we were laughing about, being old enough to remember when FedEx first came out. Like, why on earth would you need something that fast?
And now I'm like, seriously, it's been stuck at the Tracy Depot for like a week.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Which is our nearby depot that everything gets stuck at for a long time.
Yeah. But at the time it was like
Yeah.
mail pretty much got to you within 3 to 5 business days, which
Yeah.
at that point
And
was
that
only
was
Monday
good
through
enough.
Friday. And that was fine. you know?
Fine.
So yeah,
Mhm.
and so I do think we are more and more time pressured because everything feels like it has to move faster. I'm not sure that in
Mhm.
fact it does, but we are being so conditioned for that speed aspect.
Yeah, that is a really good point. And I think, as much as I love the internet, as much as I love social media, it really has fed that monster. It's like I mean, I remember when email was something you could only like conveniently check once or twice a day. And now, it's on my phone, which it still boggles. I still feel very old when I think of I pretty much have a phone that is stronger than the computer I learned on when I was in school.
Oh yeah, for me
Yeah.
that goes without saying. I
Yeah.
mean,
So, why do you think, cuz I mean, our target listenership are women in business. So, I wouldn't expect to hear from a bunch of men, whether it's on reviews or, emailing us. But why do
even
you
though we're
think
married to awesome men who might someday actually leave us a review, you never know.
you never know. You never know. My husband is incredibly honest. He would like, I am Tonya's husband, so obviously I am biased because that's how he would leave reviews. I'm sure our list might leave them the
Yeah,
same
he would do the
way.
same thing. Yeah.
But why is it, do you think that women struggle with external pressure to meet success metrics so much? Because I feel like our reviews are a snapshot of the business world. Like it's not only these people feel this way.
The first thing there's a couple things. One, I have become even more aware because of our conversations, and
Mm-hmm.
that is it's just the pressure of being a woman. I have opted out of a lot of the woman responsibilities. I chose not to have children, and so I have never had to deal with all of the elements that go along with that. It doesn't mean that I don't appreciate it, because I
Mm-hmm.
absolutely do. I possibly appreciate it more than women that do have children do, quite honestly, because I do not take it for granted at
Mm-hmm.
all, and I know that creates a lot more openness,
Mm-hmm.
in my world for it. But I am married. But I've also been times where I wasn't married. I mean,
Right.
but all of those things add on. But I'm also a daughter,
Mm-hmm.
which means I've got parents to deal with, and there's just some really interesting differences, I think,
Mm-hmm.
of what society, and I mean all of society, and it doesn't matter what your cultural expectation is. I mean, there's all sorts of things that
Mm-hmm.
just keeps piling on, piling on, piling on. But society expectations of women, in general, 98% of the time, are different than they are for men,
Mm-hmm.
and those expectations take up more of our just existence,
Mm-hmm.
um, period, regardless of what any of these other choices are: married, not married, children, no children, whether your parents are still around or not, all of those things. And I think the other issue is truly a systemic patriarchal issue that the success metrics were defined initially and have just been around for so long out of the patriarchal society. and
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not just like down with the patriarchy in like there's nothing positive about it, because that's not true. It has swung too far in one direction, but I also believe if we completely swing to the opposite direction, we're just going to have a whole different set of
Mm-hmm.
problems. Trying to find the balance between the two for me is the trick. There are things about the patriarchal society that are positive, but they don't just translate across on everything in all ways and all places. And I think goal setting is one of them, because it's been around the way a man thinks and what his responsibilities are,
Mm-hmm.
and all of those things. And therefore I think a lot of the typical definitions of success are very male oriented. And not that they don't work for some women, because they
Mm-hmm.
absolutely positively do, but thinking that they're going to work for the majority of women is probably a misstep.
Yeah, well, and I think that, I'm thinking of also sort of what we assume takes people's time. Because I think that's part of it as well. Is, we have these traditional success metrics, and the traditional success metrics oftentimes are, as you pointed out, they are built out by people who had somebody else to run their household. And then what we've done is we've created this situation. And I know, like, when I was in grad school, we did a lot of like glass ceiling research, and part of it was about trying to figure out why this particular field was 80% female dominated, but only 10% of the positions of power were held by women. And what research found, it's because women left the industry. Well, they didn't leave the industry, but they would go into consulting once they hit middle management, because the executive level didn't seem accessible to them. And it all has to do with the invisible labor that they shoulder. But what would happen is they would go into agency work and find that they struggled because they were still to be trying to be the mom who's the room mom and volunteers in the classroom once a week and cooks all the meals from scratch. I mean, I'm not saying this, I'm exaggerating here a little bit, so dear listener, I get it. But make all the meals from scratch, do all the laundry, keep the house clean, and oh, by the way, now I'm going to run a small business, and I expect that I'm not successful until I make $250,000 a year. Right? It's like it reminds me of that saying, you can have it all, but you can't have it all at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that is, to me, a big force. And it's also why we need shows like ours that point out that there's different levels of success. And something that you've said that I'd love for you to expand on, because you've said this in the past, is different measures of success at different periods of time.
Yeah, that's something I'm surprised and not surprised how often I'm talking to my clients about that. Of, yeah, I know this is what you defined as success, but it was what you defined as success a year or two ago. And let's talk about all the things in your world that have changed since then.
Mm-hmm.
And when I'm talking about all the things in your world that have changed since then, almost none of them are actually directly related to the business. It's the kids are no longer in elementary school, they're in junior high, and one of them is on a travel soccer team.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it's those kind of things. Or 2 years ago, mom and dad were both doing really well, but dad has since passed away and mom's not adjusting well.
Yeah.
I'm making up random examples, but all of these things actually have huge impact
Mm-hmm.
on what success needs to look like for you. It could be as simple as 2 years ago you were single and really happy, and now you're dating somebody.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, all of these things add in. And one of the things that my experience, and I think part of it is because they have the resources to do this, is men typically have been able to compartmentalize work from personal
Mm-hmm.
easier. Now, I think there could be something in the brain. I'm not really sure about that. It's not my area of expertise. I do think there's also often they have other resources that help them
Mm-hmm.
to better be able to compartmentalize. But a lot of the goals that we set and the things that we're talking about, we're assuming that level of compartmentalization. And it was and is one of the things that I am much better at than almost every other woman I know. And it did allow me to do things differently because I could really compartmentalize. Causes a whole lot of problems at other places. So I'm not saying it's necessarily a better answer. But
hold on, we have to pause there because I just love your ability to say, like, this is something I do really well, but oh, by the way, there are consequences in other areas for the fact that I can do it really well over here. Thank you for that. We need more transparency like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like that's the answer. It's
Right.
just an answer. It's a version of an answer. But I do think that makes a difference. And women have been taught that they should be compartmentalizing these two things, where until you have a really, really large organization, it becomes very difficult to truly compartmentalize because the things do overlap. And because they overlap, you really need to treat them as a full unit together, not as two separate things. And even if their business does get larger, often it's not a skill set that they have. So let's stop pretending like, we're going to treat it like two separate things. Let's treat it as your life instead of your personal life and your work life. Let's just treat it as your life.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. So the other theme that I think comes out in the reviews we've gotten is the feeling that there's not enough hours in the day. And so I'm curious from your perspective, having, been advising business owners for 40 years, why do you think solopreneurs and small business owners always feel short on time?
Part of it is because they have somewhere in their life, and I don't know where it could have come from because there are a lot of potential sources. So,
and we are not therapists.
I'm not saying like I'm surprised. I just it's like it could have come from 1,000 places.
Right.
They have bought into that. If I'm not busy, I'm not productive. If I'm not productive, I'm not valuable.
Oh yeah.
Right. And so. And early on, it's a lot of hard work. And so we just keep thinking, well, like if I'm not working that hard, then I'm not working as hard as I should. Right. We start shoulding ourselves. That's never good. And so I think we fill up every free space that we have. Sometimes with good stuff, not saying it's all bad, but not always. Right. And then, and this is when I talk with my clients a lot about, is if you don't actually have margin and leave margin, then there is no space for anything else to land without pushing something off. Right. And I was actually talking to this specifically to a client last week. And what she said is, yeah, my margins have actually been like at the edge of the paper a little bit further. So when it goes out on the printer, it says, are you sure you want this? Because it's not actually all going to print, because the printer actually can't print to the very, very edge of the paper. And she says, so that the thing comes out and, there's, a few letters missing on
either side.
On either side. Right. And I said, yeah, no, we want to get at least back to like the standard margins that are like 1 inch on the sides and an inch on the top and the bottom, so that if you need to add something, you can actually write a note in there on the margin and be able to read it and know, and that analogy really applies to our life and our time. If we really are filling it up as full as it can possibly be, when something unexpected happens, good or bad, and we always assume it's bad, but what if you have this great opportunity and now you can't do it because there was no margin for it to be done? Right. So we always assume it's because something disastrous happens and now we can't, and because normally those we still deal with, and that means something else drops off. But you're also forgetting all of the fabulous things that you might be having to say no to, that if you had margin, you could say yes to.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's like things, I'm just thinking of, I've gotten speaking engagement invitations before where I'm just like, there's no way. Like, I'm too backed up. I can't say, you know, even though the event maybe isn't a month, it's like there is no way that I could push everything forward that I need to push forward in order to make that happen. That, you know, that not allowing for any margin is probably one of our biggest disservices. And this is something that you have said, and I think it's important to bring this out now. So just for the benefit of our listeners, so Gwen doesn't work Fridays. Gwen works a 4-day work week. Just in case you're wondering why I'm saying Gwen, that's because I work a full work week and then some, because we're working on me still. But Gwen works a 4-day work week. And you're very protective of your Fridays, very protective. And I have heard you tell clients before about, you know, really encouraging them to tighten their working time and saying, you know, I doubt you are more productive in 6 days than you would be in 5. And once you're down to 5, I doubt you would be more productive in 5 than you would be in 4. Tell me how that maths out for you.
So where it maths out, there is a point that you need an X amount of hours, right? But most of us have spent some time in some sort of a corporate-ish job. And when I say corporate-ish, it could be being a waitress. I mean, but you know, working for somebody else.
Working for somebody else. They're paying you for your time.
They're paying you for your time. You're a W-2 employee of some sort or another. Almost everybody, and there are always like a few exceptions that they were, as people say, truly unemployable. That this just is never going to happen. But most of us have done it, at least a little bit of that. And that gets into our head that we're supposed to fill that time with work. And what happens is when there isn't good work, we fill it with less good work.
Right.
And then sometimes we fill it with even less good work. And so there's a point that you can keep pushing that envelope until you get to a point it's like, no, I'm actually not able to get everything done that I really, really want to get done. Now, I also know from lots of experience in lots of different ways and places that you're not, if you work 40 hours a week, and we're absolutely only working 40 hours a week, you're not going to have 40 productive hours. That is not the way that it works. Usually at best, you can do about 80%. That's the guideline that I've seen. Somewhere between 80 and 90% is about the very, very best that you can do. But most of us are generally functioning closer to a 60% kind of level when we work for ourselves, because we distract ourselves doing all sorts of other things, and we fill in our time with all sorts of other things. So an example that I'm dealing with right now, I've been doing quite a bit of work on Fridays for the last several months, but it's because I need to go to physical therapy twice a week for a couple hours during what would be my normal work hours.
Right.
So I'm trading some of my Friday time off time for some personal stuff that's temporary. It's not long term. I'm not going to have to do it forever. But know that I don't get to count that as work time, because it's not work time. I'm not working. I'm often listening to a book, a business book or whatnot, but I wouldn't have set aside time to do that otherwise. This is not work time. Right. And so understanding that sometimes we're trading one for another. And quite honestly, I was about 3 weeks in and I was really frustrated because I kept feeling like I needed to get some work done on Fridays. And then it occurred to me, it was like, oh, wait, no, I'm losing 4 hours of my work week every week right now. And it was like, oh, well, okay, well, that makes sense then. And I know as this winds down, it will be much easier for me to be able to go back to my Fridays,
right?
Being completely off. Doesn't mean that they're always completely off. Sometimes I will work because it would be like working overtime. Some weeks you just need to work some more hours. That's okay. But most of my clients, when they have for any reason had to constrict their hours, find that they can still get all of their work done.
Right.
And so my goal always is, constrict it a little bit and see if you can still get all the work done. Constrict it a little bit more, a little bit more. I use my bookkeeping as the easy example. And I say it all the time, I'm the weirdo. I love doing my bookkeeping. I love playing with the numbers. I can make my bookkeeping take 4 hours each time I sit down to do it. I also know that I can get it done at this point in about 75 minutes.
Right.
Can't get it done much less than that. There's busier weeks and not busier weeks. I can get it down to 60 on some weeks, but that's really what it has to be. It's not like I can get it down to 15. It's not going to happen.
Right.
But it's playing with that, right? But I can easily expand it to 4 hours. Yeah. And I think we do that with a lot of things, particularly the things that we like doing.
Well, I think things that you like doing, and also things that I'm going to call them creative in nature, that like there's no prescribed time limit for it, right? There's no universal standard that bookkeeping takes 75 minutes. Therefore, you get in a room and somebody asks the question. I don't know what room you'd have to be in for somebody to ask the question, how long you spend on your bookkeeping. But let's just pretend you're in a room and somebody asks the question. One person says, oh, it takes me about an hour and a half. Somebody else says it takes me 4 hours. Nobody questions them. Nobody says, you must be bad at bookkeeping because it takes you 4 hours. The assumption is just like, oh, that must be complex. And this other person's bookkeeping must be simple. And so it's easy to let those things stretch. I think back to, when I was working for a university as a public information officer, part of what I had to do is I had to write stories about the research that came out of my focus area. And I had a partner who was at it for a lot longer than I was. She'd been there a couple of years. And when I started, she said, here's my recommendation. You designate 2 meeting days a month or a week. So of your 5 days to work, 2 are meeting days. And 1 needs to be an admin day. 1 you leave open, like Mondays. She always said Mondays leave open, you'll get pulled into a staff meeting or whatever else. She's like, and then Fridays are your writing days. Not very many people are working. People will not be able to answer the phone. Just write on Fridays. What I found though is best case scenario, I could write 2 stories on a Friday. Sometimes I could get a third in, but it was really hard for me to do more than 2 stories a week, because I was coming from a newspaper background where I had to file a story every single day. So when I had all day to write, it felt like it was luxurious. How am I going to fill the hours? And I couldn't figure out, why is it so hard to write these stories? These are not hard stories. These are like single source stories, right? Well, it's just because if that was all I had to do that day, there was no reason to be on purpose. So I was much better just going, okay, I have to file a story 3 days a week. And the stories were easier to write. I didn't have writer's block. It was so much better for me. And I just remember thinking how interesting it was at the time, right? Like, oh, what works for her doesn't work for me. Mm-hmm. And I am so much more productive if I have that deadline pressure, where she was the opposite. She just wasn't the same.
Right. Yeah. And that really is the trick, is figuring out what is going to work for you. And I'm going to reemphasize it because I think it's so important. Mm-hmm. If you create margin, you have to not fill it up. You have to get comfortable with the space. And my experience in working with my clients is3when I give them space, they're okay with it for about a half a second. Right.
Well, if you're me, maybe
as soon as we've designed it so they've got space,
right,
literally within usually less than 30 days, they've done something new to fill it back up. And it was like, no, we need to keep the space. So when it's needed for other things, not the new thing, but the existing thing that goes whoop, because every once in a while it goes whoop, that it doesn't knock everything else off the plate or stress you out or put you, into overwhelm or any of the rest of the things. But not being, I'll say, on the hairy edge of overwhelm all the time becomes actually uncomfortable.
Okay. So I have 10 questions that I'm not going to ask. Those will be questions for another episode. That's an unintended teaser. So far what we've talked about, so I want to put a pin in that for just a second. And so we've talked about the external pressure that women in particular feel as entrepreneurs to meet traditional success metrics, right? Defining success by what others say success is versus actually looking within and deciding what success is for them, and feeling completely valid, fair, reasonable, and accomplished for those individual success metrics. We've talked about the time piece. We've spent a lot of time actually talking about time. Really the question was, why do entrepreneurs always fall short on time? And where you landed is, I'll just sum it up and say, we try to pack too many things. We try to pack more than 24 hours of stuff, work and personal, into a 24-hour period. We don't feel like we're adding any value when we're spending time thinking and strategizing and those like working on the business tasks. What you were just saying is, even when we hire a professional to help us free up time, we just turn around and we fill it with other things. Now, what I'd like to do is, because we're about out of time, I want to give our listeners just a few practical tips on like what are the actions they can take to have a better business life. And I want to start, Gwen, with that piece. So if I'm going to free up time, how do I not fill it with other stuff? How do I protect the time as I free it up?
So the first is being okay, being bored, not doing something productive, just truly, being in a kind of a vegetative state. And I'm not even saying meditating, because meditating in and of itself is another activity, because now I need to meditate 30 minutes every day, right? I mean, it's truly saying, it's okay if I just like get up and walk around the block. Not because I need to walk around the block because it's healthy for me and, all of those things. But yeah, I'm just going to go outside and spend a little time outside and sit in my garden for no reason.
So having actual white space, like true white unscripted time. Okay.
Yeah. And start with little tiny amounts, because if I tell you to do that for a day, you will lose your freaking mind. But if I tell you to try and find 5 minutes to do nothing, you can probably do that, because that's not quite so scary. And then at some point it's 10 minutes, and then it's, 15, and then it's a half an hour, and then it's an hour, and then it's a half a day. And then, that's where you work into it. And as you get into bigger chunks, then it's about having hobbies and things like, if I don't do my hobby, it doesn't matter that it doesn't get done.
Right.
So it's there, I'm filling up the margins, but I'm really filling it up truly with stuff that absolutely doesn't matter. If I don't work on my quilt or my knitting or my whatever for 2 weeks, life does not end at all.
Okay. So I like that. That's really good. And because I think that's the other thing, right? It's like, oh, I freed up time, but now what? Nobody ever talks about that, as far as I've ever seen. I mean, I've had people say, well, get a hobby. It's like, well, that feels like more work. And I don't want to do that. So I like that idea of, starting even in 5-minute increments. And if you're going to fill it with things that don't matter. Do not fill it with a meeting. I'm going to not fill it with laundry. I'll let you decide if you want to fill it with laundry. It's just not my goal.
That probably needs to be done. So that probably doesn't count.
Yeah. So that's the deciding factor then, right? It's whether it needs to be done or doesn't need to be done.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't need to be done, then you can put that into your white space. But if it does need to be done, that has to fit within, we'll call it, quote, work time. Yeah. All right, Gwen, any other thoughts you want to share?
So I do think realizing that defining success for yourself is hard is really important, because there will if you start sharing it out in broad strokes, you are going to find a lot of people are going to argue with you that that's not actually success. And the truth is, for them, it probably isn't.
Right.
But we're not defining it for them. We're defining it, for us. And the third thing I would say is, this is the place where having somebody who can give you true accountability can be really helpful if you're really serious about doing this. I hold you, I hold you loosely accountable, because you haven't actually told me to hold you accountable, so I'm not. But I hold you loosely accountable about how much you work.
Yeah, you do.
I bring it up from time to time. I reflect it back to you.
Mhm.
You've not made that request of me, so I
No.
don't actually do it, other than I want to make sure you don't get burned out, because that does matter to me, because I
Right.
want you to continue to be able to work for me.
Yes, that's true.
Okay. But you haven't asked me to do that, so I don't truly hold you accountable for that. But if you did, that would be something that we would talk about and reflect on a regular basis. And true accountability requires someone who cares about it, who really cares about you and your success, who is on the outside though, and not on the inside. Usually this can't be a spouse, because they've also got their own agenda that usually runs really parallel with yours.
Right.
And so that can be, not as useful. So you need someone who's objective. It's best if they can be non-judgmental about it. I mean, that really is where true accountability comes from, non-judgmental. But it also means that they have to be able to be insightful enough to give you actual insights to help you get past whatever it is that you're struggling with. And that's not everybody.
Right. So define insightful for me, because I feel like the context in which you just use it is different than how I hear it defined.
So for me, insightful means that they can actually provide an insight that you wouldn't have been able to come up with on yourself, by yourself.
Right.
Probably.
So it's actually new information, new perspective. Oh, I've never thought about it that way. Or, oh,
exactly.
I didn't see that.
New information, new perspective, and or an idea or tactic or process to say, have you thought about trying this?
Okay. I like, and the reason is I hear insightful oftentimes, or insight confused with wisdom. And I knew that's not what you were saying. So
yes,
I think that's a really good way to frame it. And so, really what we're doing today is mirroring back to you, if you're listening, whether you're actually listening to the right show, right? Like if you see yourself in any of the reviews that I read off, then you've come to the right place. You're listening to the right show. We are recording this for you. If you are listening, you're like, oh yeah, me too. And then, gosh, leave us a review. Add your name to the list. We'll read off the reviews every now and then. We won't make a huge habit of it. We know that that's not necessarily the most exciting thing always, but I think it's so important as entrepreneurs to recognize that we're not alone. So much of our time is spent solo, unless you're doing some big extroverty thing like Gwen does. Gwen's very extroverty. I am not. So this is how we can develop community, even if it's not back and forth. And Gwen, I want to say thank you for breaking this all down and entertaining my questions, because you didn't really know what we were going to talk about. And listener, I want to thank you for listening. Of course, you're always welcome to reach out to us. You can email me at Tonya@everydayeffectiveness.com. That's Tonya. Leave us a review on wherever you're listening or watching this. And we would just love to add you and your questions to upcoming episodes. So until next time, we will see you soon. Thanks for tuning in to The Business You Really Want with Gwen Bortner. I'm Tonya Kubo, reminding you that sustainable success is within reach. Make sure to subscribe to the show and visit thebusinessyoureallyWant.com for more resources. Until next time, keep dreaming big and acting with intention.